The Unsinkable Titanic. The stars studded the sky on a clear spring night, the sea bitter cold and calm. Frederick Fleet saw the iceberg approaching. In panic he raised the alarm. They ordered the ship hard a starboard, as many seamen would have done, but the damage sustained by brushing the berg would not have happened if they had hit it head on. Instinctive dread rose in Captain John Smith, whilst in Thomas Andrews his fears were reflected. So he sent his designer to the decks below in order that the damage be inspected. Andrews confirmed a gash from the bow past the fifth bulkhead. It was a mathematical certainty. The ship could not float. In just over 2 hours, she'd be dead. Smith was an able seaman, a captain of great respect. He knew in his heart that panic could kill, so he asked for time to reflect. He took himself quietly to the radio room. Jack Phillips was working the night. Using the SOS signal for the first time in history was a decision that proved to be right. Then Smith ordered lifeboats swung out, and the first officer freely obeyed. The instructions for Joseph Lightoller that night proved burdens so heavily laid. "We've room for 1,200 in lifeboats," the first officer began with a cry. "But there's 2,200 people on board. We can't let the rest of them die." They began placing women in lifeboats. Children were first to go too. Ida Strauss wouldn't leave her husband. "No, Isidore, I'm staying with you." The passengers wouldn't believe she was sinking, though the decks were beginning to tip. The lifeboats looked hellish, swinging out from the side. So many passengers remained on the ship. By 1:30 a.m, the ship had a list. Keeping footing on deck was an art. When the bow became submerged in water, that signalled time for the panic to start. Locked in the back of the liner, the poorer steerage passengers were made to wait. It was only once all of the lifeboats had gone they decided to open the gates. It turned to 10 a.m. or thereabouts when the ship upended and the poop deck rose high. Torn from the ship the first funnel, killed desperate souls swimming by. Then the ones that were left on the rising decks began praying and shouting the Lord. The band had stopped playing some time before, and many were washed overboard. With a sound that would not be describable, the ship lifted and then tore in two. Then it sank without trace, never more to appear. All this on her maiden voyage too. "It was like a crowd at a football match," one of the survivors said. The people in the water were screaming and cold, and one by one they were dead. 2 hours off, the Carpathia, the ship being the only one who picked up the distress and raced to her head, having no idea she was gone. This was 2 years before the Great War took its toll, when life was measured in gold, when a person's worth could be measured in cash and not by the wealth of his soul. Death played its hand that April night. Discrimination was shown to no one. The elite and the common united in death by the time the Titanic was gone. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line, would spend the rest of his life in shame. Not only had he taken a seat on the boats, his need for speed was apportioned some blame. The captain of the California nearby was awoken that night from his bunk, ignored the distress and campaigned all his life. Like the Titanic, his reputation was sunk. By the first light of day, survivors were rescued. Only 700 in all. 1,500 people had died in one of the greatest disasters of all. Lessons were learned from the Titanic, for it is written on the history book page that it saw an end to the Victorian class system and an end to the Gilded Age. A disaster like that wouldn't happen again. No more would man be so cocksure. An entire society mourned that year. Its very fabric had been ripped to the core. But over a century on, it's hard to forget, and it has to be said with a frown. More than just the sinking of a ship took place the night the Titanic went down. Robert Littler.